Здравствуйте еще раз.
Hello again.
Да, мы
Yes, we hold such meetings periodically.
помещение.
I'm in this room, if I'm not mistaken, for the second or third
Тема
time.
сегодняшнего сообщения о проблемах
The
продвижения.
theme of today's message
Я начну с того,
is
что
on the problems of spreading the conception of social safety in society. I will begin by saying that next year it will be 25 years since the first thesis of the conception of social safety were formulated in the magazine Молодая гвардия, with a circulation of almost 1 million copies. This was in February 1990. Despite the fact that the article that was being prepared was titled, "For What Should Science Be in the 21st Century?" It was an answer to the question of the academic newspaper Poisk. All universities had to answer. And so I was instructed to answer for the entire then Leningrad University, named after Zhdanov. And it will be 20 years from the moment, so 5 years from 1990 to 1995, when the conception was created, its first distributors appeared. In 1992, it was published with a circulation of 10,000 copies. And in the year 1995, it passed the regime of parliamentary hearings on November the 28th, 1995. I want to pose a question to all of you, because today it is clear that many people will be looking directly on computers, so the question stands before them too. The question can be formulated as follows, and we are asked: the conception of social safety has existed for, as a minimum, 20 years. It is widely represented on the internet, but still, it is not in newspapers, or in magazines, or on radio, or on television. Why? I am constantly asked this question. Moreover, in the quality of an example, they use the Quran, which took 20 years factually, one might say, to spread throughout the East. I'll begin with our last analytical note. So, raise your hands, those who read the last note on politics. Well, that's enough to address it. There, at the end, in general, there is such a phrase. And to some extent, this phrase is the answer to the question I posed. The only way to resolve this political paradox of political practice in the conditions of the taking place in Russia crowd elite arrangement is if the conception de facto acquires the status of an esoteric doctrine, on the basis of which the politics of protection of society from inter-Nazism, liberalism, and nationalistically Nazi opposition to the tyrannical dictatorship of liberalism is already being implemented. Well, what is written must always be read, and despite the fact that I have written a lot in preparation for meeting you, nonetheless I will try to tell it. Spoken language is different from written language. To put it in a simple way, it turns out the following. The task of superstate global governance is to, under any circumstances, maintain the society as crowd elite. Because it's not about taking power over the whole world, but about how to prevent a human society from taking place on Earth. This is what you must understand. But how did we, after all, decide that the conception of social safety is gradually acquiring the status of an esoteric teaching?
Статус эзотерического учения. В толполитарном обществе всегда есть эзотерическое.
The fact is that in a crowd elite society, there are always esoteric teachings, that is, for the initiated, for the chosen, and exoteric teachings for everyone.
Если судить по тому, как в 20 веке
This is the main criterion for the existence of a crowd elite society.
интернета преподносится Библия,
Judging by how the Bible was presented at the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 21st century,
должно существовать.
with the advent of television and the internet,
Но
it is no longer an esoteric teaching, but this esoteric teaching must exist.
известен некий Сергей Данилов, который много ездит.
And we have an example.
От
So, probably many of you know a certain Sergei Danilov, who travels a lot and gives many speeches, in our view, on behalf of Vedic pseudo-Zhretsud, judging by what we saw in Ukraine. In his last speech, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Volgograd at the end of September. So everyone, probably you also saw it, Starikov, Kurginyan, Devyatov,
Геняну,
everyone is asked the question, how do you relate to the conception of social safety?
концепция общественной безопасности. Ему тоже
So, he was asked this question, how do you relate to the conception of social safety? The answers always are so evasive, but he answered bluntly. In the conception of social safety, they reached the conceptual level. And as it turns out, people are governed at the level of conceptions, at the level of ideas. This is a so-called structuralist method of governance. And they gave their vision, moreover, they also laid it out, they have it all formulated, and it is called dead water. Now it's included in the list of extremist literature. There is such a court decision. Therefore, the sufficiently general theory of governance, it's like a fragment of dead water. How do I relate? Fine. Well described in high quality. The people thought about what they were writing. Whether I agree with some provisions or disagree is another matter. Maybe I have my own vision and my own conception of the great spas. But you will not find a laid-out system of governance in the formal expression of a higher quality, better than theirs. Everything else is hidden. At least they have published this. Take it, study it, use it. They even pass the parliamentary hearings. What is the danger of the conception of social safety? It gives a huge layer of information, and people who are obviously unprepared fall into demonism. The conception of social safety has no safety lock. Everyone can use it as they understand it. If a person, as they say, with a demonic structure of the psyche, has adopted the knowledge that they give, the question is how to use it. A knife can also do different things, right? So it is the same here. The danger lies precisely in this. All this is revealed to a person, and here he reacts. Ah, that's it. Wow, the things I will do now. And the result is stuckness. That is, safety precautions must be observed when studying the conception of social safety. The novice level should go according to the measure of mastering of the conception of social safety. This is not to say that everything is quite simple there. There is such a huge volume. There you have to sit down and study. Moreover, it is written in such language that you need to reread it. There is a lot written between the lines, and they use very serious phrases, that is, high-quality material, very high quality. The question is, how to use it, and how does it influence a person? So I know many of the followers of the conception of social safety. It is very difficult to talk to them. In general, it's impossible to find a common language with them. Therefore, there is such a stagnation, both in the promotion of this information and in the mastery of it by masses of people. It would seem that the conception itself is high quality and well spelled out, and speaks of the kingdom of God. But so far it is somehow hushed up, and they give such information, not everyone is ready to take it. People are putting the conception of social safety into their arsenal, and the Nravius level leaves much to be desired. That is, Sergei Danilov said, I think this is very serious information. If we talk about the theory of governance, then you will not find anywhere a better laid out theory of governance than the sufficiently general theory of governance. Then he says, but there is one problem. This conception of social safety, and mine is actually different. It is a danger. Then he says in what exactly? If we translate his words into a clear, strict language, it turns out that people with a demonic type of psyche structure are strengthened in their demonism, and this poses a danger to society. That is, it is already clear that he knows about the types of structure of the psyche. He uses this conceptual apparatus, using which he makes such a statement. We can answer this as follows. It could have been like this, but there is something about which the representative of Vedic pseudo-Jretsud does not know. The conception of social safety carries, among other things, also the function of social hygiene. Is it understandable what I just said? That is, even these 20-odd years, 25 years, we have statistics that show that those who try to strengthen their demonism using the information of this conception and to advance on its basis, they self-liquidate. Is that clear? Well, now a little history. Over the past year, almost exactly a year ago, on November the 16th, 2013, a World Forum was held in Beijing. Such a global forum at which the entire West was represented in the person of all the main countries of the West, America and Canada, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, France, and so on, and the East, which was represented by China and Japan and Korea and Turkey. There was a very large Turkish delegation there. The theme of the forum was Socialism and the World Today. And Zyuganov was not invited to this forum. Somehow we got to this forum. There were two of us, the rector of the Agrarian University Viktor Alexeyevich Yefimov, and myself. My speech was the last one, and I had the opportunity, especially after I learned that both of our speeches were pre-printed in a collection in English and in Chinese. I had the opportunity to speak in Russian. The working languages were English and Chinese. So the translators who were there, they did not satisfy us. I had my own translator into English, and they gave me a translator into Chinese, with whom I worked closely for the preceding 2 days to master the conceptual apparatus. When I saw that our reports and the time for speaking was very short, 10 minutes, and there was a lot to say. So I said that, in principle, I could read my speeches in English, but since you, everyone, about 300 people, have, as I saw, everyone had this collection on the table, then open, conditionally speaking, page 199 in Chinese, page 189 in English, and whoever wants to, read it out in full, and I briefly will tell you. And for the first time, I said there that besides the East and the West, there is also Russian civilization. From the point of view of Russian civilization, we are not satisfied with the process of globalization itself, which is objective. Our president even spoke about this. But the subjective conception of this globalization does not suit us, that it does not satisfy us, and therefore an alternative has been created in Russian civilization. And I called the conception of Western civilization the Bible. There in 10 minutes you can't say much, nevertheless we managed to say a lot. After that, I arrive on the 19th, return to Russia, and suddenly find out, on the 20th, that Putin approved the conception of social safety. That is, he approved it on the 19th, and on the 20th the mass media reported about it. And right there, on the evening of the 20th, the mass media reported that the Lefortovo court is trying, I say precisely, trying, to bring dead water, such is the name of the conception of social safety, into the list of extremist literature. Why do I say trying? A year has passed since the meeting of the Lefortovo court, but not a single of our works is on the list of extremist literature. Because even the judge told our representatives, "But you sue me," and it will drag on for a very long time, for years, and for now a final decision will not be taken, and so on. But notice how all the mass media reported. It is not yet, but they did not talk about this. But they already reported as if dead water was on the list of extremist literature. In response to this, President Putin, at a meeting with students of juridical faculties, spoke, saying that, "I am a jurist, the head of government is a jurist. You all here are jurists, and I cannot understand why as soon as you don't like something, so you immediately strive to prohibit it. Write something better, more meaningful, more precise. But why should it be banned?" We take this as an answer. Of course, what Putin approved, what was prepared for him in the Security Council, this is not at all the conception of social safety. There is something written on 3, if I am not mistaken, 4 pages. But those who prepared, they perfectly understood that You see, the conception has existed for 25 years. We have 80 million internet users in Russia, and those who are familiar with this information, they just need to type in Yandex or Google the conception of social safety, and they will immediately get to our 65 books and more than 200 analytical notes. That is, if they wanted differently, they could have come up with other terms. Moreover, if you just type the abbreviation COB, you will immediately come to it. I say widely spread. Because last week I lectured on the sufficiently general theory of governance to the government of Karelia. There were two groups for me, youth and older people, and a friend helped me on the computer, who laid out schemes on theory of governance there. And those that he could not find on the flash drive, he just typed in Yandex. And I see that absolutely all the schemes are there, and even more. That is, it suggests that the conception is indeed widespread. Before I came here today, I received a message from our supporters from the University of Toronto in Canada, who were holding a conference on the conception of social safety. And I could evaluate, according to concept apparatus, what they understand and what they don't understand. In addition, a new youth policy was registered in Brussels a year or two ago. These are our Russian-speaking youth who study, work, live in all EU countries. And they hold 2 or 3 conferences a year. Well, I'm not even talking about the fact that the conception is widespread. According to our estimates, no less than 50 to 60 countries around the world. In general, where there are Russians, it doesn't matter if it's Indonesia or San Marino or some exotic country, it is there in one form or the other. Why did Putin say that? It seems to us that he is familiar with Molotov's speeches at the meeting of the Supreme Council in 1939, when fascism had already become ideologically entrenched in Germany. Then Molotov spoke and said, "Ideas can only be defeated by more powerful ideas. It is impossible to defeat them by destroying the carriers." And what do we see? We defeated fascist Germany on the 6th priority of generalized means of governance, by conventional weapons. And now, fascism originated in Ukraine, and in its most unattractive form, when they say that even the fascists did not behave the way that these National Guards do. Well, now, after all, to the question. Why is it so hard for this information to spread in society? To answer this question, I will tell you the following. Our disagreements with our opponents do not lie in the sphere of logic, but in the area of the unconscious, that is, at the level of worldview. Logic, as it is known, belongs to consciousness. The first one in Russia, in the Russian civilization, to understand this was the poet and publicist, philosopher Alexei Stepanovich Khomyakov, a contemporary of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. In his article, The Opinion of Russians About Foreigners, he bitterly remarked, I will read this, that inner consciousness, which is much broader than the logical one, and which constitutes the personality of every person, as well as of every people, has been lost by us. The close logical consciousness of our people's life is inaccessible to us for many reasons. Because of our proud contempt for this life, because of the inability to understand living phenomena in a pure, rational educatedness, and even due to the absence of data that could undergo analytical deconstruction. I do not say that these data are not, but they are all such that they cannot be understood by a mind brought up by foreign thought. And they are fettered by a foreign system that has nothing to do with the beginnings of our ancient spiritual life, our ancient enlightenment. The forms we have taken from the outside cannot serve as an expression of our spirit, but every spiritual personality of the people can express itself in the forms created by itself. Here, when he says we, ours, he has in view the elite of that time. And here, when he says inner consciousness and simply consciousness, so the inner consciousness in his lexicon, this is that which is the worldview. But in essence, he says that it is all about worldview. And every opposition has a certain logic. So, when we communicate, we argue, then each disputant has some kind of logic. So, it is within the framework of which conception a person thinks, and the conception, through culture, forms a worldview. That is, stereotypes of behavior in the internal world, and a person begins to argue and not even notice that they do not understand each other at all. All this was expressed by Kosma Prutkov. Many things are incomprehensible to us, not because our concepts are weak, but because these things are not included in the circle of our concepts. That is, so that two disputants come to a common opinion, a concept, and a concept is an image plus a code, a word. That is, people pronounce words, and they evoke different images, and there is no understanding. So the worldview is in images, the world understanding is in lexicon. Logic belongs to lexicon. That is, logic belongs to the world understanding. That is, to consciousness. This must be remembered. Well, since yesterday, it seems, the big church council ended, at which Patriarch Kirill outlined what Russian identity is, then these things are directly related to the theme of our conversation today. He noted, belonging to the Russian nation is determined by a complex set of ties, genetic, marital, linguistic and cultural, religious and historical, but none of the above criteria can be considered decisive. And for the formation of Russian national self-awareness, it's imperative that the totality of these ties with the Russian people, regardless of their nature, is stronger than the totality of ties with any other ethnic community of the planet. When he talks about religious ties, he says every Russian should be Orthodox. And now I will ask, has anyone seen Solovyov's Sunday talk show? A very remarkable show. On it there, this is also a direct bearing, later I will explain, there was such a liberal historian, Pivovarov, who claims that Russia is a part of the West. Film director, Karen Shakhnazarov, opposing him, said that maybe we are a part of the West, but why has the West been aggressive towards us for 200 years? And he lists Napoleon's campaign of the French, the Crimean War, and the Second World War. So, since in Beijing, I indicated that Russian civilization is the same self-sufficient civilization as the East and West. Yes, in terms of population, the largest civilization is the East. China alone, together with India, represents 3 billion, that is, almost half of humanity, plus the Muslim Islamic East is also included in the Eastern civilization. The West is represented by the USA at 300 million, EU at 600 million, Canada, Australia, and some countries in South America. This is Western civilization. How does one civilization differ from another? Ideals. Even without any scientificizing, if we simply pose the question to ourselves, are the ideals of the West and the East different? Of course they are different. And what is at the basis of the ideals of the West and Russia? Also different. What is at the basis of the ideals of Russian civilization? Striving for pravestность, справедливость. And the president said about this that the concept of справедливость in Rus has always been a kind of non-worldly, that is, that this is what we should strive for. And is there a concept of справедливость in the West? There is. Everything that does not go beyond the law, everything is справедливость. So, Shakhnazarov said that for 200 years, the West has been aggressive in relation towards Russia. But we can say the following, that not 200 years, but the entire 1,000 years since the baptism of Rus, the West has shown aggression in relation to Rus. That is, these are all the knights, these are German order structures, this is the Poles in the time of troubles, well, and also what Shakhnazarov said, and many more things can be cited. That is, if we are a part of the West, then why is the West so aggressive in relation towards Russia, towards Russian civilization, throughout the entire history of Christian Russia? Maybe it doesn't like the Christianity that Russian people adhere to, or is it something else? By the way, the East has never conducted expansion in relation towards Russia. You might say, what about the Tatar-Mongol yoke? Yes, this is a big question. A lot of things can now be found on this theme. In this respect, in the Geographical Society, Putin was first shown. They opened for him a map of Great Tartary. And these are maps of precisely Russian civilization long before Christianity. In general, one should very carefully analyze any speech by Putin and correlate not only what he said in one place, but what he said in another. Now here is a very interesting interview of him, which he gave before flying to Australia to our news agency. By the way, his premature departure from Australia is one of the most striking speeches of our president. In what sense? After all, it was not even the Prime Minister of Australia who met him, but the Deputy Minister of Defense. He flew away a day earlier and left there the Deputy Minister of Finance, thus making it clear, this is your level. That is, Putin knows how to answer without words. Despite the fact that all our liberals fought in hysterics after that, they say, he got scared, he left. All he had to say, he said there. So, there are many contradictory opinions regarding the Tatar-Mongol yoke. In 2005, I flew to Mongolia with a group of our comrades, and there I was received by the President of Mongolia, Bayar. Had a long conversation with him. I asked him, what is your attitude towards the Tatar-Mongol yoke in relation to Russia? He smiled and said, these are all myths. So we will give you the opportunity to go around. We actually traveled over 3,000 kilometers in Mongolia in jeeps. And just correlate the following. After all, Mongolia, as it was in the 13th century during the invasion of Rus, it is now the same. There were 2 million. When I was there in 2005, I was told, and now there are 2 million, of which 1 million live in Ulaanbaatar, and the rest roam there as they roamed then. And it is difficult to imagine that such a huge country could be captured by Genghis Khan and his companions. Still, why is it so much in our history that they write about the Tatar-Mongol yoke? The Battle of Kulikova is a strange battle. Both sides were about the same. There is a version that Rus had her own beliefs, her own ideas about God, and that the Christianity imported to Rus by Vladimir the Baptist. Alright, if it had been the true teaching of Christ, but did not correspond to local ideas about God. Just imagine the time, the end of the 10th century. After all, there were no books in Russian. What could Vladimir read there? There was no Bible. The Bible appeared in Russia only in 1876. That is, Vladimir could have learned something only from the oral stories of the Greek Church, the Catholic Church, and Islam. And what could some hierarch who came from Constantinople in the 10th century say? He could retell something which can be correlated in our view with historically taken shape Christianity. And this historically taken shape Christianity is very far from the teachings of Christ, just as historically taken shape Islam is also very far from the teachings transmitted through the Prophet Muhammad. Because Emperor Constantine was a Jrec of the great invincible sun, but in essence, he was a Jrec of Amon-Ra. He saw that the Roman Empire was disintegrating, in which there were many gods and goddesses that were not invented by the Romans. They were taken from the Greeks, and they were simply given different names. And he decided to give one God. And at the Nicene Council in 325, by a vote of 318, it was recognized, although these disputes lasted almost 300 years, that Jesus Christ is not a man, but God. That is, the incarnation of God. And therefore, in the Nicene symbol of faith, there is not a single word from the teachings of Christ. But the hierarchs of our church do not even want to discuss this. If you tell the patriarch about this, I think he knows all this very well. But if you tell him about this right in front of the camera, it's interesting to see what he would answer. So far, he said that before baptism, there were some savages here in Rus, but what about the country of many cities? And now imagine, in our understanding, the first attempt to baptize Rus was made by Andrew the First called, Christ's follower, if, when Jesus Christ had passed away, he came to Rus, then the question arises, why did Rus not accept baptism back then? The Ossetians accepted, the Georgians accepted, the Armenians accepted, but the Rus did not. What is the matter? I don't want to waste time now. I could tell you how we understand this matter. The past is multifaceted, in contrast to the future. The future is multivariative, but the past is multifaceted. Now there is a lot of polemics about what the past was like. It was one. You see the glass, you see the facets. What is the dispute about? Which facet exactly reflects the glass? And some of the facets, these three, are visible. But those three are not visible at all. And they also throw us different ones, like Levashov, who was trained in the United States, came here and began to throw all kinds of things. If you argue about which facet objectively reflects this subject, you will never agree. But in these disputes, the future leaves. And now let's imagine that there were beliefs, and after all they talk about the baptism of Kievan Rus, and there was also Northern Rus, Pskov, Novgorod, but what was it like there? And they didn't really accept it there. And in fact, 4 centuries before the Battle of Kulikova, there was a war between those who accepted the Greek faith with those who did not. I say it again, had it been only the true teaching of Christ, only faith towards God, but it was faith in God-man, who for some reason somewhere in the distant Roman Empire was recognized as God. And the war was fierce. It is very likely, someday we'll know for sure, that in the Battle of Kulikova, the ones who won there were those who recognized this Greek church, but not in all aspects. Then, you see, there was also the Niconian schism, and those who put their trust in Sergius of Radonezh, who sent Dmitry Donskoy to battle, do not belong to the church that is now. Well, what conclusion can be drawn from all this? And the conclusion is very simple. It is connected with another statement by our president about the October Revolution. You remember, at a meeting with teachers, historians, he said in front of them, well, you know that the Bolsheviks who made the revolution, they promised peace, land to the peasants, plants to the workers, but they after all deceived. Have you heard this? I don't think that the president is historically so illiterate that he doesn't know that the Bolsheviks made the revolution in October 1917, together with the Mensheviks, with the Trotskyists, the number of which was greater than the number of Bolsheviks. And now the question is, who ruled after the revolution and during the Civil War? The Bolsheviks or the Mensheviks Trotskyists? And here is the most delicate moment. Yes, in reality, the new statehood created a new bureaucratic governorial apparatus. Is that so? It created an administration where governors were needed. There were tables, there were papers, a pen, you had to write, read. There was a document flow. And if you read, now it's been published a lot, why were almost 90% of the government Jewish? Many are at a dead end, and the answer is simple. In Tsarist Russia, Jews, for the most part, received a good education, and by 1917, 85% of the country's population, by force of its peasant character, was illiterate. These illiterates rushed into the revolution and committed it. They nevertheless could not be admitted, not because they were bad, they were simply illiterate. And so, a universal literacy campaign was launched. During the life of one generation, also literate Russians appeared, who slowly began to oust the Jews. But until 1929, the country was really ruled by the Mensheviks Trotskyists. And even when Stalin was able to expel Trotsky, you can imagine that a huge apparatus from Vladivostok to Leningrad, and everywhere these guys are sitting and scratching their pens. Do you think it's so easy to force them out of there? I do not touch now upon the questions of repressions. There are always objective and subjective reasons for a revolution. If you only think that the revolution was made only by the Jews, then this is stupidity. The Romanovs brought Russia to such a state that society was ready for a revolution. Well, yes, the Jews, of course, did take part. Moreover, the Jewish bankers in many ways really financed this revolution. But had the people as a whole not supported, there would have been no revolution. I don't think our president does not understand this. He is an intelligent man. So, at a meeting with the Popular Front, he utters the following phrase: "But we are not Trotskyists, for whom the objective is nothing, but movement towards it is everything. To us, the result is important." Why I say that it's necessary to carefully juxtapose the statements of the president in one place and in another. Only then will it become clear. He has to maneuver, and often speak in ambiguities. In general, this is the duty of the ruler who is surrounded by an entourage. But the main thing is, this must be attributed to objective reasons, that the revolution was accomplished largely thanks to the Church. The Church has always been not on the side of the oppressed, but on the side of the elite. How is monarchist Russia presented to us now?
поскольку
If there hadn't been a
моя
revolution,
мама родила в
schools and
деревне,
grammar schools would have been
в
built.
деревне,
No one needs to tell me all
и
this,
учиться там
since my mother was born in a village before the
Я
revolution,
уже в 90-м
and there was
году,
no
еще когда
opportunity
была
to study there.
совершена буржуазно-либеральная
Back in
революция
1990,
в
I
университете,
talked with a representative of the church. Even when the bourgeois liberal counter-revolution had not yet been committed. At the university, when students and teachers were gathered at the physics department, and the rector of the theological academy arrived with a couple of teachers, and I talked with, then it turns out that they are all former university graduates. Then there was a campaign. They say, you need to feel sorry for the priests. Why were so many priests shot, innocent of anything shot, and so on and so forth. Those who already knew my views asked me to pour a tub of cold water over them. I say, wait, now. When the rector, Father Vladimir, had spoken enough, I raised my hand and said, can I ask you one question? Since you often convey information in parable form, my question will also be in parable form. Moreover, it was important for me whether he would be able to see the catch or not. I tell him, so you live in the taiga, on a farm of some kind. To the nearest village, it is several hundred kilometers. And to the city, all of 1,000. You have 2 sons. It is only you who goes to the village and to the city. And once, returning from the bazaar from the city, you see how the sons are fighting among themselves with shafts. You rush to separate them and get them in the head or in the neck, I don't know. Who is to blame? Well, of course, I am, he answered. Then I hit the table with my fist and said, you are to blame for the revolutionary situation in the country. He started crossing himself and saying, what? I say, that's what. You had an absolute monopoly on the mass media, which no one has now. Then there was no radio, television. An illiterate person did not read newspapers. And there was no cinema, but in every village and almost every settlement, even a small one, there was a church. He received all the information from your fellow priest. What you brought up, that is what you got. So, now we can assert that for 1,000 years in Russian civilization, society has overcome idealistic atheism at the unconscious levels of the psyche. So, atheism can be of 2 types, idealistic and materialistic. How do they differ from one another? Well, materialistic atheists simply say, God is not. And when they are asked, what is there? They answer, well, nature and its laws. That is to say, they elevate the creation of God, nature, to the rank of God. With them, everything is more or less clear, however. But with idealistic atheists, it is more complicated. They say, God is, and begin to invent all sorts of slander against God. This is showing the icon. This is such and such a grandfather with a beard. This is a person whom God sacrificed as his incarnation. In general, they begin to compose for God something that does not correspond to reality in any way. There is such an ancient Greek concept, anthropomorphism, that is, the attribution of human properties to non-human entities. God is a certain supramundane reality, which, of all species on earth, only to one species, Homo sapiens, he gave freedom of choice and the possibility to acquire freedom of will in love. Once given such a possibility, it is never taken away again. As strange as it may seem, the whole problem is in the prepositions in and towards. What is the difference between faith in God and faith towards God? See? Change the preposition in with towards, and we will find ourselves in a different world, in a different civilization. God uses the language of life. He speaks to everyone in the language of his life circumstances. Scroll through your life and you will see, each of you have your own life circumstances. It is in the language of these life circumstances that this supramundane reality speaks to everyone. If you are attentive to this language, then you will always find that before any misfortune happened to you, you were warned about it. God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. And God does not violate anyone, even with the truth. And there is no compulsion in religion. Having made such a statement about Russian identity, that Russians are necessarily Orthodox, our patriarch has already sown the seeds of discord. What is it? Russia, as a civilization, is not only multinational, but also multi-confessional. And Shakhnazarov said on that talk show, and we after all have 20 million Muslims. Is Chechnya not enough for us? In all regions, in Dagestan and Tatarstan, there are really extremist elements everywhere. For some reason they are Islamic, but some representatives of even Russian nationality convert to Islam and put shahid belts on themselves or on girls. I will ask this question. On the basis of what I said before, that one civilization differs from another by ideals, that the ideal of Russian civilization is the pursuit of spravedlivost, that after the revolution, the people, not knowing Marxism, nevertheless followed the Bolsheviks, because in this Marxism, at least in some way, the ideas of spravedlivost were reflected. It doesn't matter that building a society of spravedlivost would not work in principle. But hearing these words, that you did not even hear during the monarchy, but all sorts of thoughts, this was instantly curbed. And one of the reasons for the revolution is the decree on Cook's children, which was signed by the blessed Emperor Alexander III, which said that children of commoners could not be admitted to gymnasiums, higher educational institutions. That is, factually, the Emperor, by signing such a decree on Cook's children, closed the possibility of expanding the cadre base to the borders of the whole society. For comparison, take Japan. That is, there was also an emperor. If serfdom was abolished in our country in 1861, then in Japan there was the so-called Meiji Restoration. In the course of it, the emperor proclaimed that everyone is equal before the emperor. They had their own nobles there, their peasants. Everyone is equal, and everyone has the right to any kind of education. And before the war, so I said that the East had never carried out aggression in relation to Russian civilization,
на какое угодно образование. И к войне, вот я сказал о том, что
But they tell me, what about Japan?
не вел агрессии в отношении русской цивилизации.
And Japan was perfectly used by Great Britain and the United States against Russia.
Великобритания и Соединенные Штаты против России. Но когда стали оценивать
But when they began to assess the educatedness of the Japanese sailors and our sailors of our ships, the comparison was not in our favor.
Это одна из причин, почему
This is one of the reasons why, only one of the reasons, there are also many others, why there was a defeat and a shameful peace with Japan.
И позорный мир вот с Японией. Ну, а
Well, if the society of Russian civilization overcame the idealistic atheism of all churches in the name of Christ in 1,000 years, but at the unconscious levels of the psyche, what does this mean?
Что это значит?
I said at the beginning that the worldview is a system of stereotypes that are formed by culture.
Которые формируются
Cultures are secondary in relation to the conception.
по отношению к концепции.
The Bible is a conception of governance, a subjective conception of governance. We live, like in the West, in a biblical culture.
Определить это несложно.
It is not difficult to determine this.
Живопись, где
If you look at paintings, there are many, from the classics, of course, not modern painting, many paintings on biblical plots. You read classical literature, you listen to classical music, and you will understand that we live in a biblical culture. And how do you know if you really overcame it?
Ну, да, мы-то говорим.
Well, yes, we are talking about it, but was there anyone before this? There was.
Был. Советский, вот сейчас мы живем после
Now we live after the bourgeois counter-revolution of 1991.
Вы не прочитаете ни одной книги.
You will not read a single book, you will not see a single film, you will not hear a single melody, a song that the whole people would sing. This only shows the defectiveness of this liberalism.
Все те, кто кричали,
All those who shouted, "Now we have freedom, give us freedom, we will show that we are creators," they gave freedom. And what?
и что? А? Да. Ведь Putin
But Putin correctly said on television, so what? Television is just for earning from a minute of advertising time, or for showing the so-called defective series. He called them not detectives, but defectives.
Он назвал их не детективы, а дефективы. Это действительно так. А вот
This is indeed the
мое
case.
поколение воспитывалось на этих романах. Был такой
In Soviet
писатель,
times, my generation was brought up on these novels. There was such a writer, Ivan Antonovich Yefremov,
это
who wrote
одна грань
Ties of Athens.
прошлого,
This is one facet from the past and two
и два
possible
возможных
variants
варианта
for the
развития
development of the future,
туманность Андромеды
the Andromeda Nebula
и час быка.
and the Hour of the Bull.
Причем там и там
Moreover,
межпланетные полеты,
in both books,
человечество
there are
летает,
interplanetary flights.
но
Humanity
на планете
flies.
Торманс в часе быка писатель
But on the
высказывает
planet of Tormans, in the Hour of the Bull, the writer makes a very interesting judgment. I think that for this judgment, where for the first time he gives an evaluation of the Bible from the position of a person who looks at our history as a distant, distant past, hundreds of years. For this, he was liquidated. And this is what he writes. The suppression of individuality brings people into a human herd, as it was in the dark ages of the earth, when the Christian church factually fulfilled the task of Satan, embittered and made murderers of multitudes of people. Unfortunately, the main religious book of the most technical and powerful of past civilizations, white, was the Bible, filled with evil, betrayal, fiery enmity, and endless murder. Soon after writing this novel, Ivan Antonovich died suddenly. They say that Andropov personally dealt with his fate when he headed the KGB. But there is an interesting moment in all this. Ivan Antonovich Yefremov wrote about interplanetary flights. They talk a lot about this, they are going to Mars there, and it is rare to find strict scientific statements that biological life in space without a magnetic field has no protection and perishes. I personally knew about this since 1975 and understood perfectly well that the Americans did not fly to the moon. There was just an agreement, and there is information about this on the internet. When the Americans told our leadership, well, okay, your man is the first in space, let us be the first on the moon. Well, by all means, if you need it that way, because in the scientific world, it is like this. If something is known in one country, then this something very quickly becomes known in another country. We have works on this theme. And now when they talk about interplanetary flights, well, I smile. Maybe I'm wrong, but the biblical civilization gave birth to the technosphere, with the help of which it protects itself from the biosphere. I was abroad, in China, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and in other places. They asked, somehow they stopped studying Russian. Everyone is studying English. And I say, why are you surprised? The technosphere was created under the whip of usurious interest by the West. All documentation is in English, and it's no surprise that they learn English. True to the seated Western representatives, I openly said that the sixth paradigm will no longer be technological, but worldview methodological. And since it is most clearly laid out in Russian, then, during the life of one generation, those who want to understand how to build the future will learn Russian. And Russian will be the language of international communication, interstate communication in every country. Right now, many scientists are looking for contacts with UFOs, aliens. Well, Ivan Antonovich Yefremov, a very intelligent person, nevertheless, again, this is my personal evaluation, he fell into the so-called tunnel scenario. In what sense? Let us ask ourselves this question. What is easier to transfer over a huge distance to other galaxies? Mass or information? Or otherwise, matter or information? First such a question. Now the second question. So, through Einstein, not Einstein himself, but through him, a ban was imposed in science on researching the vacuum. The vacuum is the primary aggregate state of substance. It is known from science that information is transmitted through wave processes, and the speed of information transfer is the higher the density of the aggregate substance in which the waves propagate. Well, for example, even sound waves, 330 meters per second in air, 1,500 meters per second in water, 5,000 meters per second in steel. How can this be explained? Very simple. The range of a molecule or an atom, the smaller the gap between the molecules of the atom, the faster the waves propagate, both sound and electromagnetic. Then the question is natural. Where is the smallest gap between the particles of the aggregate substance? In the vacuum. It is not there at all. And there, in the vacuum, fields exist. They are called torsion fields, that is, fields of torsion. Official science absolutely denies all of this and says that there is nothing like this. This is all nonsense. We have a committee of pseudoscience headed by academician Vitaly Ginzburg. Allegedly, there is no point in even discussing all this, but I want to approach interplanetary flights from a Nravius point of view. In general, our technosphere, its development has reached such a point that contacts with alien civilizations are possible, but they don't happen. Why? How did the 20th century begin? With the novel by H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds. Remember, the Martians attacked the Earthlings? And how does the 21st century begin? Komsomolskaya Pravda, on November the 21st, publishes an article by the American physicist, Martians were destroyed by aliens with hydrogen bombs. The article ends like this. At the moment of the alien attack, the Martian civilization in terms of development was similar to our ancient Egyptian at the time of the construction of the pyramids. Why did they not please? No answer, but there is a pre-warning. It is better to stay away from aliens. They are evil. Maybe they killed each other. That's why they don't show up. This is the most important thing in the article. Let's take a look at Hollywood movies, where aliens come to Earth for what purpose? Be sure it is to kill us. And Ivan Antonovich Yefremov writes about a certain ring of planets where there is intelligent life. In our opinion, there is a reason carrying life, human, and we are not allowed there because we are really spiteful, aggressive. What are Hollywood films? This is a mirror into which the modern civilization of Earthlings looks. Now, let's imagine. So, Ivan Antonovich Yefremov is writing a novel, a fantasy novel, in which he describes how cosmic ships take off from planet Earth to the planet Tormans. He does not write about how, at a speed not exceeding the speed of light, one can move to another galaxy. No human life alone is enough. Then the question is, how do the inhabitants of different so distant planets communicate with each other? And now let's imagine the same fantasy novel in a slightly different aspect. On Earth, as a result of the study of the vacuum, we come to the discovery of such fields with the help of which it is possible to transmit information and receive information not at a speed of 300 kilometers per second, but instantaneously. That is when it becomes clear how, in general, the inhabitants of different, so distant planets communicate with each other. The people on Earth, seeing a different life, absolutely fantastic, cannot but change life here. And what should people do? Now, even if we only assume such a possibility, then what should those who supervise the biblical project do? I said that their task is not to seize all power, but to make sure that a person here does not take place in the quality of human, so that civilization does not become human. Of course, in this case, it's necessary to prohibit exploring the vacuum and coming to the discovery of those fields with the help of which it is possible to establish communication with extraterrestrial civilizations. And so, the article that I have already read to you, this is precisely confirmation that such a project exists, because, I say again, 100 years from the beginning of the 20th century, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, he is also a science fiction writer, he does not pose the question, but how from there did the Martians fly here, though they don't look like people there? At the beginning of the 21st century, aliens flew to Mars. After all, the memory of an ordinary person is no more than 2 weeks, and not everyone will remember what science fiction writers wrote at the beginning of the 20th century, and not everyone will juxtapose this with what they write now. So, the society of Russian civilization over 1,000 years overcame the idealistic atheism of all churches in the name of Christ, and over 3 generations, materialistic atheism. So we tried to identify ourselves. Why? Well, I personally, at various high-level meetings, I have been posed with the question, how did you come to this life? Just think about it. Stereotypes are a very serious thing. In order to go beyond the boundaries of biblical culture, it is necessary to break a stereotype. What is needed for this? First, to understand that we live in biblical culture. Do you find somewhere in a textbook or somewhere else that someone once spoke about it? We need to come to these stereotypes. We need to understand that culture is secondary in relation to the conception, to come to this conception, and only then begin to form an alternative, if that conception does not suit us. Did I tell you clearly? Where is the West now? It is at the stage of not even overcoming idealistic atheism. It sits in there deeply. It is in this culture. There people do not have such questions as in the Russian civilization. And the East? Well, the East, it is different. The Buddhist East, the Islamic East, the Confucian. In China there is no concept of God, there is the concept of heaven. But, I say it again, the East did not start a single world war. The East did not create the technosphere. When I was in India, and I was told that the West had no influence on them, showing me, here in Bombay, only the terminal was built in colonial times. And I show them my phone and say, what about this? Mobile phones, computers, the car you are driving me in, the plane on which I flew to you. What is this? These things are not created by the East, but by the West, and they speak to you in their own language. They were very surprised, but there was nothing with which to object.
Возразить было нечего.
We now live in an extraordinarily difficult era.
Сложную эпоху.
All the same, Russian civilization, despite the 13th article of the Constitution, spelled out by the liberals under the guidance of American consultants, no ideology can be nationwide one, there is a search for an idea. And most importantly, it is clear that the ideal should be much more powerful than that ideal on the basis of which there took place the restoration of the disintegrated during the February after the October Revolution Russian Empire, and more correctly the Russian civilization, and moreover, it collected around itself a whole socialist camp. Vietnam, Korea, China, the countries of Eastern Europe. The fact that now it all fell apart, this is temporary. This is precisely because ideals, which were completely devalued by the leadership of the Central Committee of the CPSU, have lost their strength. But society is in search of ideals more powerful than those ideals that created the socialist camp. There is an English poet, Kipling, the one who said, "East is east, and west is west, and never the twain shall meet." And we have our own poet, Fyodor Ivanovich Tyutchev. He looked at the same problem differently. The oracle of our day said, "Unity by blood and iron can be alone achieved, but we will try by love to get it wreathed, and then what's firmer, we will see." Russian civilization has a special mission. Kipling simply voiced the main algorithm of the Bible, divide and conquer. So he wrote, "East is east, and west is west, and never the twain shall meet." It is like, I am saying this, and whatever you do there. Well, because the West in general thoroughly exploited the East, if you take the largest country of Eastern civilization, China, by the end of the 18th century, its gross product exceeded the entire gross product of the entire West, including Russia and America. And then the population was 500 million. Those Western leaders who came to China said that this is some other civilization. All provinces were connected by canals, rivers. Trade was very developed, some industry. They came with technical innovations, and the Chinese said, "We don't need this." And only when Japan began to conduct a technical revolution, only then did China begin to accept technology. So, the worst happened in the 19th century. China did not admit anyone, not even ambassadors, did not allow Western, British, German, American embassies to open. Then the West began to trade in opium and put the Chinese on this drug. The provinces were different, they often fought among themselves. They joined in this strife, and the so-called Opium Wars began. Because the emperor, when he was told, ordered the destruction of all opium warehouses that were on the coast. Well, and then by bribery, money, they penetrated into different provinces. These opium wars claimed 100 million lives out of 500 million. And in Europe at the time, to say nothing of 500, they did not have a population of even 100 million. I had to communicate with the Chinese for half a century. First with the naval officers, with whom I studied together at the Dzerzhinsky school. Then in 1993 with the rector of Shanghai University. Then with the first secretary of the embassy. Everyone told me about the same thing. They will frighten you with the expansion of China. We are surprised that Russians are smart people, but why didn't you think that when there was no statehood yet, and the whole north, taiga, everything was open, there was no expansion of ours? We could have. We had enough people. We are a southern people. Our expansion is always south. So Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, all the way to Australia. And in your country, the West will surely frighten you with this. What is special about the modern era? This is the first time, it has never happened before. The West fought against Russian civilization, mercilessly exploited the East, and the Russian civilization alone fought off the West. In general, all the wars of the West against Russia are proof that Russia is not a country, but a civilization. And it won victories from the days of the Dog Knights to the last war. Now we are also dealing with this aggression. But the peculiarities of the era are precisely in the fact that Russia is now beginning to act in an alliance with the East against the West. And we can say that the West has already lost this war, which has not yet begun. And whoever saw the Sunday talk show, Shakhnazarov, in a very cautious manner, expressed, "With your sanctions, you forced Russia to turn to the East. And now this is irreversible, because China's human resources, our natural resources, plus intellect, this is also a resource. The West, which has not overcome even idealistic atheism, is in the process of overcoming it. But we are the only country, true in the form of a civilization, that has overcome both idealistic and materialistic atheism. So, Pushkin has the words, "To where shall we sail? Towards the kingdom of God on earth." And now, the ideals that I talk about all the time are being formed. But, within the framework of the conception of social safety, the ideal on the basis of which already the whole of humanity should unite, and not just the socialist camp, is formulated in a very succinct form. And I will name it. People become human, regardless of nationality, racial, religious affiliation, because a human is the one who lives under the dictatorship of Sovest, and Sovest is an innate religious sense that connects a person from birth to death with the supramundane reality, which is called God. I wondered for a long time how was this Russian civilization, which was from California, Alaska, and to the borders of Poland, how was it governed? At the time of Pushkin, there were 70 million. These telephones did not exist, there was no internet, but it was governed. How? In a certain regime of self-governance. What we have called global conceptual power does exist. Many are looking, but where are these people? Here is the scheme that is presented here. We show how, in the sufficiently general theory of governance, we have such a concept as an enclosed system, an object of governance, a system of governance. Well, it's good to show it on the example of a car, closed by feed-forward and feedback lines. Feedback lines can be positive or negative. What are we seeing here? If you remember the picture of the change in the logics of social behavior, then, until the middle of the 20th century, there were, let's say, negative feedback lines. Negative not because they are bad, but simply the amplitude of the oscillatory processes decreases after it's taken out of equilibrium. Positive feedback lines are those when the amplitude of the oscillatory process increases. All stabilization systems are based on negative feedback lines, on submarines, airplanes, and so on, and all atomic reactions, amplifiers in radio engineering, are based on positive feedback lines. That is, whoever is familiar with this, they will understand. So, where is the global predictor in this scheme? I ask this question not only to this audience, but to everyone who watches this conversation. Find it, because the contour of feed-forward lines is closed on a person, and a person can go to what is indicated here by the all-holiness of God or a certain supramundane reality. Try to determine where conceptual power is here. And I say it again, because the concept of conceptual power was not sucked from the finger, but from such a concept as the entire function of governance, where the first 4 stages are to identify new factors of the environment, against the background of this, to highlight new knowledge, not this. The second, introduction of knowledge about this factor into your system of stereotypes. Third, since we paid attention to this factor, it's not just without reason, but we should begin to form the so-called vector of objectives. Add your list of objectives to this vector of objectives in relation to this new factor. Fourth, you form the conception of achieving the objective. The first 4 stages are the functions of conceptual power. Everything is governed according to the entire function, and it must necessarily be. In our view, it was formed a long time ago in ancient Egypt, which was ruled by 22 hierophants, which, translated from Greek, means knowing the future. And then, no Jews could have written this Bible. We did not create an alternative to the Bible at all. We studied the Bible, episodes that are there, and the characters, from the point of view of nraviousness, evaluated the nraviousness of these characters who acted there. And what we saw, by announcement, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. But, by default, do all this, but only gently and culturally. Steal, but only with the help of lending interest, and so forth.
Я заканчиваю. Идеал, на основе которого
the ideal on the basis of which mankind will be united in the conception of social safety is formulated. People become human. It has not been sucked out of the thumb. Only in Russian civilization is there such an idiom. It is like an idiom question. All are people, but not all are human. This is amazing. All are people, but not all are human. Because in any lecture about the types of psyche structure, I begin with this. I immediately ask questions. Why aren't all people human? And then the lecture reveals that there is an animal type of psyche structure, zombie, demonic. There is a human type of psyche structure. That is, this suggests that in potential, everyone can acquire a human type of psyche structure. The idiom was formulated a long time ago. Perhaps it has already existed for thousands of years, on the basis of which Russian civilization must fulfill the mission of uniting humanity. Sooner or later, humanity will unite. There is no alternative to this. The question is, on the basis of what? And will humanity become human? Or will it be a civilization of zombies and animals who are governed by demons? This is how the question should be posed. No one, not in America, not in Great Britain, not in Germany, not in France, not in any civilized country, has ever raised this theme and will not raise it. We asked ourselves questions. Just imagine, 25 years have passed, and there is no conception of social safety. Question, what is there? There is Kurginyan, there is Tarikov, there is Dugin, and there are many other people who are one person. But if this person leaves, the whole shebang falls apart. Well, roughly like Zhirinovsky. There is no Zhirinovsky tomorrow. There is no Liberal Democratic Party either. They all participate in talk shows, they argue there. We are not there, but we are without any PR on television. It is not about me and my comrades who are giving speeches. There are already a lot of us. We know that. But the conception is slowly advancing in society without any PR. Well, someone might like it faster. But I am, perhaps, the oldest of them all. And who, if not I, would like to see the fruits of my labors during my lifetime? And my comrades, my peers, when I tell them, they say, well, Volodya, you speak well, but it's a pity that neither you nor I will get to live in this wonderful time. To which I replied, you know, Petya, life did not begin with you and me, it will not end with us. We have children, grandchildren. If we are not indifferent to what culture, in what society they will live, then we cannot relate to it otherwise. I am personally not indifferent. That is why, after leaving the service in 1988, I devoted my whole life to this cause.
этому делу. Но один
But
здесь
one
не
alone
сможет
cannot
сделать.
do anything here. This is the cause of a large collective.
И то, что эта команда
The
растет,
fact that this collective is growing, we feel it. Because, well, I'll tell you that I receive mail from all over the world.
я почту получаю со всего мира. Когда
When the
интернет
internet
появился,
appeared,
вот
the
первая
first
мысль
thought
была, ведь
was,
это для
this
нас.
is for us.
Невозможно было.
Otherwise, it would be impossible to spread this information around the world. But here,
Но в
in the year
2000 году было
2000,
1 миллион
there were 1
пользователей.
million internet users.
Еще в 2010
Back in
году, 4
2010,
года назад,
4
было
years
25
ago,
миллионов.
there were
А
25
сегодня уже
million.
более 80
And today there
миллионов.
are more than 80
И
million.
вот теперь очень важный вопрос. И для
And
всех
now a very
сидящих,
important question,
и для тех, кто
and
смотрит.
for everyone sitting here, for those who watch this program,
Вот
all the
вся
information
информация, как
about how to
построить
build a
справедливое
previous society,
общество, как
how
идти
to
к
come to
человечеству,
humanness,
вся есть. Написано
everything is
не
there.
только мертвая
Not
вода,
only dead
концепция
water, the
общественной
conception of social safety has been written, but each separate section, economic, philosophical, psychological, about the credit financial system, everything is worked out to the detail.
Вот
Here
оно
it is.
лежит, а общество взять это
But
не может.
society cannot take it.
Если
What does it
задать
mean?
вопрос с точки зрения
If we ask the
полной
question from the point of view of the entire
общество не
function of
может
governance,
преодолеть первый этап
society
принятия
cannot
решений.
overcome the first
Выделить на
stage
фоне
of the entire
того,
function
что
of governance,
знание есть,
highlight
это
against the
не это.
background of not this, the knowledge that is
Я не
this.
буду сейчас пересказывать,
Well, I will not retell now.
разные,
The reactions are very different to our information,
но откуда
but
вот
where did the idea come from
появилось
that they want to give the
представление
status
о том, что
of
хотят
esotericism?
придать статус эзотеризма? Общество толполитарное. Есть
The
градация
society is crowd elite.
наверху, по
There is a
2-3
graduation
диплома,
up there with
люди уже
2 to 3
взрослые.
diplomas.
Как они
These
рассуждают?
people are already adults.
Мы
How do they
хотим
reason?
иметь с ними дело. Я имею
I have to
3
deal with
высших
them.
образования,
They
я
say,
доктор
I
всех
graduated.
наук, там, и
I have
профессор.
3 higher educations,
Я
a
читаю,
doctor of
мне
all
сложно,
sciences, and a
непонятно.
professor. I
Там
read,
внизу
and for me it's
тем более
hard.
не будет
I don't
понятно.
understand. All the more it will not be cleared down there.
Вот что главное. Вот
That's the
откуда
main thing.
попытка.
This is where the attempt to give esoteric status comes from.
Но самое удивительное,
But the most amazing thing is
моложе, тем они
that the
быстрее
younger people are,
охватывают.
the faster they grasp it.
И да, фразы
And
длинные,
yes, the phrases
да,
are
сложно
long.
подчинённые.
Yes,
Зачем?
complex.
Это
For
не
what? I am
чувствуется.
often
Затем,
asked the
чтобы
question.
не проскочили
But in
её,
order
как
that you will
обычно
not
вы
slip
читаете
through it,
художественный роман,
as you usually read a fiction novel,
отчитались, чтобы соотнесли
but that
свои
you read it
образы с
in
теми
order to
образами,
correlate your
которые
images
автор.
with those images that were in the authors.
И те, кто вчитывается
And those who
в
read
опыт
it,
общения с
I have the
такими,
experience
те
of
говорят:
communicating
«О,
with
вот я
such
уже
people. They say,
въехал, вчитался,
I have already understood,
сейчас
I
всё
read
нормально».
myself into it, and everything is going fine.
Я на этом
This is where I want to end my
хочу
message.
закончить свое сообщение. Там, наверное, есть,
There are probably questions, as always.
как всегда, вопросы
The
будут
questions will be
некрасивые,
off topic,
потому что я получил
because I got a lot of
множество.
them.
Итак,
These are questions for the
электронной-
internal
не
predictor.
по электронной почте, а есть такой в скайп-конференции вопросы к внутреннему предиктору. Вот. Ну, давайте пока вопросы вы.
Vladimir Mikhailovich, can I have a question? Why, in your opinion, does Putin not get into the system of education? They don't let him, he does not want to.
Я это
This is a
отдельная
separate
тема,
theme,
образовательные стандарты.
educational standards.
Мой товарищ Михаил Викторович Величко
So, my comrade Mikhail Viktorovich Velichko, here in this library, said, an era is a system of education. I ask students this question. Tell me, at first without disclosing what I mean by educational standards, tell me, are the educational standards of monarchist Russia, Trotskyist Russia, Stalinist Russia, Khrushchev's Russia, Brezhnev's, and the Russian Federation, are they the same? What do you mean? They say, of course, they are different. How are they different? Well, they begin to suffer. Well, physics is more than chemistry. And I say that the question is not about that. Then I ask the question, what do you mean by educational standards? So, at the foundation of educational standards are the so-called ultimate generalizations, distinctions. They are of two kinds, exoteric and esoteric. Esoteric is matter, energy, space, and time. I will not translate as it was in ancient Egypt. Esoteric, matter, information, measure. And if Putin understood this, he would have thought about how to do it in order to change educational standards. Because we wrote there, in the last note, about why he does not change the government. Because how ordinary people look at this, these are all corrupt, Chubaises there, Gaidars and so on. But they are a product of the system of education that was. Putin expels these, appoints others. They are also a product of the same system of education. Where is the guarantee that they will be different? We are all a product of this system of education. That is, we could talk about this separately, but the answer is such.
There are questions about the southeast of Ukraine.
I will immediately answer about the southeast. If Russia, after all, Patriarch Kirill implies that ideals are outside of development, but they are in development. If ideals were developed for Russian civilization and were at the level that we have just said, there would be no Ukraine in that fascist form, and the Union would return. Putin was right when he said, those who don't regret the collapse of the USSR, those have no hearts. And those who think about returning to the USSR, in the form in which it was, they have no heads. Putin understands that it is not possible to enter the past. But Patriarch Kirill does not understand. He wants to return us not only to the 20th century, but to the 19th, which we have already overcome. That is, look at all levels, even the church ones. There is discord. We began our activity with the fact that we wanted to sincerely, without any tricks, simply talk with the hierarchs of the church, give this knowledge, ask for an opinion. They simply did not listen to us. That is, we understand that the church hierarchies that have existed in Russia for 1,000 years, and in the world 2000, they just won't give up their positions. This is a business in its own way. And look, there was the Central Committee of the CPSU, where everyone wore black jackets, ties, they gathered in the Kremlin Palace of Congresses, and now they gather in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. But this is also the Central Committee, only each has a kilogram of gold and silver. Even carrying it is hard.
More news. October the 25th in Slovakia. Not the anthem of Russia was played, but the anthem of the USSR.
Yes, I was already sent this. It was not the anthem of Russia, but the anthem of the Soviet Union. But I'll just tell you, traveling around almost all CIS countries, speaking in very different audiences, in academies of sciences, libraries, and just in front of ordinary people, my every meeting ended. They listened and said, when will the Soviet Union be restored? After all, of course, this is paradoxical. A referendum was held. 73% voted to keep it. So what? All referendums after that are meaningless. They just spat on this referendum. They did what they wanted. And what did they want? To ruin the Soviet Union. They ruined it. And who will believe in the referendums from now on? And what is the point of holding them? But they are being held, and they are doing the right thing. Therefore, when Crimea held the referendum, from the West they heard, all this is not true, it is rigged, and so on. But there are other things. It is good that there are documentaries. You need to look at the faces of these people. This is the same as in relation to Stalin. What is Stalin's funeral? This is an all-people's referendum of attitude. And with regard to the revolution over these 23 years, what have they not said? But there is a very simple criterion on the basis of which an answer can be obtained. From 1917 to 1937, 20 years passed. After the revolution, was there nostalgia for the monarchy in the Soviet Union? If there was, then only among migrants, but not among the people. And now, too, 20 years have passed after 1991, and the further this time, the greater the nostalgia. And the main thing is not among those people who lived at that time, but among the youth who are beginning to understand something, who have told me, for you it's fine, you lived in those times, but how can we live now? The conception of social safety will spread throughout the world in the same way as it spreads in Russian civilization. And based on 20 years of observational experience, the main engines of this process, in general, will be the youth. This is objectively understandable, because the youth tend to think about the future. Build this future.